So here's the thing. I know that this series has been covered before, and plenty of times. Me coming here to talk about this series does not mean that I think I'm original or the most unique or whatever. This isn't even the first time I've filmed this video. I tried filming it a few days ago and I didn't check the mics ahead of time, and the sound quality was not there. So I lost my mind a little bit, took a break, made a different video, and now I'm back. So if you want to watch someone else's video instead, totally fine. Jenny Nicholson's is really good. She talks about the failing economy within the background and the world of this series. So you can watch that as well, or instead, whatever. But today we're going to talk about the Christmas Prince trilogy. Oh boy. Truth be told, I'd never seen it until this year, until this month. I'd heard of it. It just was something I just hadn't gotten around to seeing. And I actually saw Jenny Nicholson's video on it last year, and I had forgotten to actually watch the the actual movie, and now I have. I've seen all three, and it is a journey. So we're going to start with we're going to start with the first film through the third film. The formula is going to be a little different because, as you know, it's following the same couple throughout the series. The meet cute thing happens way in the beginning, and it's not High School Musical. They don't like get together, break up again, get together, break up again, get together, etc. So it really is about like the larger arc of them being a thing. And what does that mean? Being with a prince of this country, Aldovia. And how does that change her life, and how does that change his life? So yeah, I guess we'll start with the first film and just see where that takes us. Okay, so we're going to start with location. So the movie takes place in two different worlds. In the world that we know, the rom-com capital of America, New York City, wherein we meet our heroine, Amber, who works at this big entertainment mag in New York City, in the Big Apple. And she is a copy editor along with her two best friends, who you get to know a little bit later. And she is also a freelance writer who is hoping to like make it big, as we all are. And she ends up being called into her boss's office and told that she has the opportunity of a lifetime to cover the story about who is going to be the new heir of Aldovia. The thing is, the former king, has just passed away, and chances are that the new ruler is going to be the prince, aka Richard of Aldovia, who has not exactly been a media darling. Kind of more of a Prince Harry back in the old days versus a Prince William. I mean, not talking about now, I'm talking about then. He's like seen with girls and doing his own thing and living his own life. So is the party prince going to be the new king of Aldovia? We have to find out. So her boss is like, I've got to send someone, and I can't send anyone else but you, because you've got spunk, kid. And the girl's like, me? I've never written anything before, except for those 5 freelance articles I get to do a month. And she's like, well, yeah, you, because we like you, but also because no one else can go. And you're like, there it is. But also, what? So Amber gets to leave the setting of New York and flies off into Aldovia. Aldovia is this picturesque little city, world, country thing that's covered in snow and beautiful nature and all of these things that you don't see at first because, of course, she's at the airport and she's about to get into her cab to go on off to Aldovia's castle to be there for the big press conference that she's been invited to on behalf of the mag. But before she can get into her cab, a man with a very unfortunate beard kind of pushes his way through and is like, "Hey, I need this cab." And she's like, "That's my cab." And he's like, "Sorry, I gotta use this cab." And he like goes in and she's like, "You jerk," like big New York mad about this. And he's like looking at her and drives away, and she looks back at the other journalists like, "Can you believe this guy?" And they're like, "Man," and nobody whatsoever figures out that that was the prince in disguise. We move along, and she gets to ride in a van with other journalists, and she's talking to this guy who's like, "Is this your first time covering the royal family?" And she's like, "It's my first time covering anything." And he's probably like, "Okay." And they end up at the press conference, and they're waiting in this kind of little conference room, and then one of the officials of the house comes forward and is like, "We're sorry, but the prince is just not gonna be available, so you should all go home." And they're like, "You're not gonna reschedule it?" And they're like, "No." Instead of like trying to use a representative or trying to have literally anybody come out and speak to the press to say anything to get ahead of the story or the gossip or the rumors that will surely fly in the face of whatever they have been hoping to do before. Now that they've invited a bunch of reporters and then kind of treated them like this, they instead just kind of say bye and shut the door on their way out. So maybe that's why she was sent specifically, because all of the other journalists are like, "Listen, we've worked with them before, it's a nightmare." So instead, as Amber is about to get into the van to go back to the hotel, at least for the night, before trying to find a way home like the rest of the journalists there, she's like, "No, I can't go back empty handed." You know, like her boss is someone who's gonna like murder her family if she doesn't do so. Or on the other hand, like this is some sort of charity mission that will save the world if she does any of this. To be fair, she is in another country and won't have this kind of opportunity again. But either way, she decides to do like what is generally known to be like the last case scenario when it comes to investigative journalism, if my 101 class told me anything. And that's she goes undercover and sneaks in. She isn't undercover initially so much as just sneaking around in the castle, but suddenly she gets discovered wandering around, and this woman who obviously works there is like, "Hey, what are you doing here?" And she's like, "Oh, and they're like, "Oh, American. I assume you must be the princess's tutor." And she's like, "Yes, that is I. I am she." And she's like, "Of course, very good. Let me introduce you to the queen. We're not going to be suspicious. It's not like we just had about 50 or so strangers in our living room. Instead, we will assume, of course, you are from somewhere completely unrelated to those things." And she ushers her in to meet the queen. What if she was an assassin? She isn't, but she could have been. Inside the room with the queen, there's the man with the terrible beard again, and he turns around and he's like, "You?" And she's like, "You?" And it's like, oh, there's the meet cute. After that initial tension / awkwardness, they continue the lie that, of course, this woman must be Princess Emily's tutor. And the queen is like, "You're kind of early. Weren't you supposed to come in January?" And she's like, "Oh, my schedule cleared up." And she's like, "Alright." And it's as easy as that. So after that meet cute, we get into things like chemistry. Now, initially, of course, they didn't have exactly the best of starts. They're not very happy with each other, but after he's had a nice shave and a nice wash, and she has kind of settled in to the fact that she's lying to a adorable young crippled girl who has spinal bifida, she decides that, oh, we should go outside and have some fresh air, because she sees the prince outside. And it has nothing to do with the fact that she can't do complex equations to save her life. And the girl is beginning to become suspicious of the fact that she can't help her with her homework. So instead, they end up outside and they're looking around and they see him practicing archery. And he's like, oh, I don't know if she should do it. And Amber's like, oh, a girl can do anything a boy can do. Show him, Emily. And Emily's like, right. And she turns into Merida because of her red curly hair. And she just shows him up, and everyone's like, ooh, ah, impressive. And then they're like, okay, girl power, your turn. And Amber takes it, and she's like, oh, I've never done this before, and turns extra kind of clumsy. And so, of course, we have the Prince Richard come up over her shoulder, and he's like, here, let me show you, kind of doing the ghost sort of thing over her. And they pull it back, and she shoots it through a window and almost murders somebody. This is the second time we've seen an example of the dreaded rom-com clumsiness gene. Earlier, she knocked over a Ming vase, which might be as old as 1,000 years old, and it shattered on the ground, and they were like, kiss, kiss, fall, and moved on. So that never comes up again. When Amber tries to call her boss to let her know what she's up to now, her boss is like, this is the opportunity of a lifetime. This is the story you're finally gonna get. You're gonna bust this thing wide open, and then you'll be a true reporter. And she's like, oh, I don't know. I don't know if this is morally acceptable, even though she's the one who started it and did it on her own. And her boss is like, you gotta keep doing this. So she's like, okay, and decides to keep doing it. And so there are a lot of scenes of her kind of being a little suspect, sneaking around and taking out her phone and being like, and taking a picture and then going and getting another one and another one. But when she does it, she only takes one and then hides it. And then later, when you see her uploading them to her computer, you see that she has taken some impressive shots all in one. She just needed one. She's just that talented. And there's a part where she sees Richard playing the piano, so he's really soft and sensitive secretly. And so she films him on her phone from the doorway, and he doesn't notice until she's just turned it off, and then he looks up, because she's so lucky. Richard has this thing going on where he's a cross between kind of your average British looking dude, without the beard, thank God, kind of with a cross between Channing Tatum. So if that's your kind of guy, he's just boring enough to remain what a real royal would look like, and then attractive enough to be and that's my fantasy guy, you know what I'm saying? So, he walks that line. Our heroine, Amber, has that Amy Adams kind of Lois Lane, wide-eyed sort of innocence going along with a cross between Reese Witherspoon or some sort of blondness attached to it, And then we have our little Emily, who is the rival in a Shirley Temple movie, with this red curly hair and this kind of snide and snarky mischievous temperament, and the Von Trapp nature to sneak mice into her tutors' beds and things of that nature. But it's okay, because once Amber lets her know that she thinks she's a real girl, like any other real child, Emily decides that she likes her, actually. So she stops punking her out for the rest of the movie. But don't worry, because there's plenty of other tension to go around. There are lots of characters, including Cousin Simon. Cousin Simon is a foppish young lad who shows up perhaps because he heard that someone died, and that there may be someone looking to replace that certain someone to be on the throne. He's obviously conniving and unliked, and he kind of exists in order to have somebody to like snark at in a lot of ways. And then we meet Lady Sophia, who apparently is Richard's ex, and when she and Richard stand next to each other, you get a very strong Will and Kate kind of vibe. But she's the bad guy, so like don't fall for it too much. And Kate and Simon decide to like join forces, and Simon obviously thinks that something's going to happen between them, and Kate has zero interest in that happening. Not Kate. And Sophia has zero interest in that happening, and it's kind of sad. And otherwise, they act pretty much exactly like Team Rocket, like sneaking around and spying on them whenever they can, and yeah. But somebody finds out that Amber isn't who she says she is, and that somebody is Emily. Like any sort of precocious 12-year-old, Emily kind of suspects that something is going on when her math tutor doesn't know how to tutor her in math. When she leaves her laptop open one day, she just looks at it, and it's alluded to the fact that she hacks into it to look at it, but whatever. And she sees all these notes that were written up in giant font that are like, who is he? Like, who's gonna have the crown? And, you know, clever things like that. And kind of suspects that something's going on and confronts Amber about it. And Amber's like, it's true. But Emily's like, don't worry, because the main reason why I'm even talking to you about this is I want you to solve the fact that my brother is treated like trash in the news. If you can turn this around and prove to the world that he's not this guy the tabloids think he is, then we'll be partners and I won't tell anyone. And Amber's like, deal. And they shake on it and it's like, yeah. So then we have to, continue to build our chemistry and tension. So what happens next is that Richard is upset about something and decides to get away, and he gets on a horse and leaves. And our intelligent Nancy Drew decides that, in spite of the fact that she's never ridden a horse before, that she's gonna follow him. And so she gets on a horse where it came from, I guess, the royal stables, and follows him at a distance. And as he goes into the woods, she finds herself hopelessly lost. And when she tries to get the horse to turn back around and go back, the horse just knocks her off, and miraculously she remains uninjured, except for the fact that now there are wolves, or at least one wolf, that starts to approach her, and she backs up against the tree, and like, I don't know what I would do in that circumstance, so I can't really go too hard against her, but yeah, she's backing up against the tree on the ground, and the wolf is getting closer, and then luckily Richard shows up and shoots a warning shot, and the wolf flees. And then Richard is like, what were you doing following me? Which is honestly a good question. And Amber's like, I was just curious about you. And Richard's like, okay. And takes her to his secret sex dungeon. Okay, not really. He takes her to this hunting cabin that his father had set aside for them when they were younger. And he helps her get warm, and they talk about a few things, including the fact that Richard doesn't really want to ascend the throne, but that he feels guilty because of the argument he had with his father before he died. And then he decides to show her like a journal that his father had left behind, and it has this strange poem that mentions something about an acorn, or at least the seed of something, which is kind of alluding to an acorn ornament that they had unwrapped earlier that was from the father, but for some reason they don't get that in this moment. And instead, they almost kiss over his father's journal, but then he has to leave the room for some reason, and she finds a secret compartment in the desk and finds all these documents that she hides to look at later. And when she's alone back at the palace, she discovers that Richard is adopted. Dun dun dun. Let's just say that The Christmas Prince is a Disney Channel, Hallmark, Netflix-esque version of Succession, in that there are so many people vying for this one seat, but honestly, so many picky rules that really only one-ish person could possibly be that ruler, because women are not allowed to be the main ruler of Aldovia, and you need to be a bloodline. So Richard was it. But now, maybe not. Amber reasons that Richard doesn't know that he's adopted based on the fact that we know that Richard has no desire to be king. If he had known that, he could have used that against his mother in order to say, see, I shouldn't even be king. His mother, by the way, who is totally capable of ruling Aldovia if it weren't for these sexist ancient laws that they kind of brush over in the movie. She calls her friends, and her friends are like, this is gonna make your career. And she's like, well, okay. But then the prince shows up and is like, do you want to go for a walk with me? And she's like, okay. And they leave her room, and her room is promptly ransacked by Simon and Sophia while they're outside in the snow being romantic together. At this point, Amber is beginning to feel a little guilty and is like, okay, maybe, you know what, I screwed up. I should tell him. And so she's about to tell him what she's done, but he kisses her, and you know what, that feels a lot better than telling the truth, so she just doesn't. And she doesn't notice that the adoption papers were stolen, or her passport for that matter, until much, much later. But then it's time for the coronation ball, which naturally falls on Christmas. When else could it fall when we're talking about the Christmas prince, after all? And so, of course, Amber finds herself woefully unprepared to dress herself for a ball. But luckily for her, we have the young Princess Emily, who decides to bring in a pit crew of makeup artists, hairstylists, and designers in order to get her ready for this dance. After all, if there's anything we've learned from the kinds of looks Sophia and some of the others give her during the regular formal events going on at the castle, is that she really needs to stop wearing Converse high tops with her dresses like it's 2004. Unfortunately, the one rom-com movie trope that we are denied is the movie makeover montage. And instead, we have to wait like the prince in order to see the big reveal, which happens at the top of the stairs and causes every eye to turn and to look at her visage as she appears and begins to make her way down towards the prince. All eyes are on her, but Amber only has eyes for him. And the look on her face, that peace and tranquility and beauty, can only be described as a look that was something akin to a look of a wonderfully stunned and uncomfortable guinea pig as she makes her way down the stairs looking like, oh, hello, anyone's going to arrest me any moment now? And that look does not change until she meets him down there. For real. And they dance, and it's romantical. And then it's time for the coronation. And Richard goes up to be king, and then the person officiating is like, if anyone thinks that this man does not have the right to be the king, speak now or forever hold your peace. Very much like a wedding. And Simon and Sophia are both like, hey, he shouldn't be king, he is adopted. And they show the paperwork, and the guy's like, this looks like real paperwork, that's for sure. And the queen is like, it's true, he is adopted. And Richard's like, what the heck, Mom? And they are like, but where'd you get this paperwork? And Simon is like, oh, by the way, we got it because she's a reporter. And she's like, oh no, I am a reporter. And she's promptly kicked out of the palace, as you could imagine. And Richard looks infuriated and also kind of hilarious because he's like, and he has a confrontation with his mother, which, really should happen, about why the heck nobody told him he was adopted. And they were like, we just treated you like a son, so you should just be like a son, you know? And on the one hand, yeah. On the other hand, why'd you hide that from him? And apparently Emily was like an oopsie baby some years down the line after being unable to conceive and totally normal and fine. But yeah, talk to your kids about that stuff, man. As Amber's distraught and leaving and FaceTiming her dad about all the chaos that's been going on, she realizes that she solved the poem, the riddle that the father had left behind. And she goes back to the palace and she breaks back in and she's like, I need your help, to one of the maids. And they're like, fine. And they open up the acorn and find this document that really is too important to have been part of a scavenger hunt, dude. Simon is about to become king. He and Sophia had a quick courthouse wedding, which clearly is going to be annulled the second that Sophia can figure out a way to make queendom happen in Aldovia and can kill Simon off. But instead, when they're able to show up with the official paperwork that proves that Richard is the rightful heir to the throne, Simon and Sophia get a little bit of jail time, or at least get removed from Aldovia for the time being. And Richard is able to do what he always wanted to do. Not be a disappointment to his father. That loophole is solved, at least specifically for Richard. For future adopted kids, I don't know. For women, certainly not. But for Richard, who has no desire to become king or to rule Aldovia, it's solved. And so he becomes king. The end. Not exactly. Fast forward to New York and to Amber being back home and to trying to sell her story back to the publication. And her boss is like, this is not what I ordered. This is like a fluff piece. It's too nice. It doesn't give us any of the dirt we wanted. And she's like, but it's the truth. And then she's like, well, it's not good. And then Amber's like, well, then I'm not going to write for you anyway. And she quits. And her best friends are like, yeah, that's what we told you to do anyway. We always knew you would do what you wanted to do, and none of the stuff we told you to do the whole time going against your morals or the integrity you possibly should have had as a journalist. And she's like, you guys. And fast forward again, and it's New Year's Eve. They're all at her father's diner, just being, middle to lower middle class guys hanging out and celebrating and trying to cheer Amber up. One of her friends is like, that blog post you did got 20,000 likes. And Amber's like, that's nothing. And every freelance blogger in the world cried out in pain and envy at that moment. And as her friends are unable to convince her to go out, they leave, and Amber is just kind of, having her own little pity party, which is kind of understandable, when suddenly Richard shows up. And he throws a snowball at the window, and she sees him and goes out into the miraculously empty New York streets on New Year's Eve. Literally, there's no one around. It doesn't matter what a tiny corner of New York it is. They are in the most private sector of New York on one of the most popular days of the year, I guess. And she's like, what are you doing here? And he's like, I read your blog. And she's like, oh, you did? And he's like, it's the nicest thing anyone's ever written about me. Will you marry me? And she's like, you mean have the opportunity to continue to blog about us and you and nice fluffy things for the rest of my life? And also maybe call myself a princess a little bit? And he's like, yes. And she's like, okay, I do. And her father, who is inside with the other patrons celebrating New Year's, looks out and sees his daughter and is like, that's my girl. I'm sure he didn't just get engaged to someone you knew for a couple weeks. And she did, and that's the end of the first movie. It's gonna get even more wild from here, so you better buckle up, Buttercup. It's gonna be a bumpy ride. Okay, you ready?
Mm-hmm.
Really?
Yeah, maybe. Oh.